right, good evening, everybody. Good evening. It's good to see new faces, familiar faces. Before I start, as I get set up here, why don't we turn to somebody? Let's spend like 12 seconds. Say something encouraging to your neighbor. Go ahead.
I just got Sorry, everyone.
How is everyone doing?
Good.
Awesome, thank you, all three of you. Why don't we start with a word of prayer? Let's pray. Gracious God, Heavenly Father, thank you for hearing us when we pray, God. God, I thank you for every single person that's here. God, I love this church. I love CCF. But God, we know that you love us infinitely more than that. We thank you that you love us. I pray right now, God, if there's anybody in this room, it could be just one person, but I'm sure there's more, who comes in burdened, tired, weary, discouraged, with maybe something lodged in their heart, whether it was a discouraging thing that someone said that they didn't mean, but it's still in our hearts. If there's anybody here who is struggling with mental health, with different things, anxiety, God, if there's any of us in this room who are worried about something in the future, God, if there are relational fractures that are on our mind, can we come into this house, into your sanctuary, your refuge, and lay those things down at your feet, knowing that you hear our concerns, that you hear our venting, our weeping, you hear our deepest worries. And God, we can exchange those things for your joy, your peace, your comfort, and your strength. God, we are so glad that you do not shame us for the things that we go through, but you validate the things that we experience. So God, if any of us are going through a trial or challenge right now, remind us that you are with us, you love us, you are present and engaged, and you will never forsake us. And nothing can separate us from your love. God, I pray that if any of us come in here tonight in need of hearing your truth, a word of self-control or discipline or authority, God, may you melt our pride and convict us. God, that if there's anything that needs to be changed or transformed in our lives, that we wouldn't think this message is for the person to the left of us or right of us or anyone else in our family, but this message is for us. It's for me. So God, speak specifically to us a word of your love, a word of your truth, a word of your grace, a word of your discipline. And God, we are thankful for every single person in this room. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. All right, if you could turn your Bibles or swipe on your phone to 1 Corinthians chapter 12. 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And whenever you find it, you can yell "found it." 1 Corinthians 12, Genesis, Exodus, 1 Corinthians, Revelation. Found it. We got it. Awesome. It is before 2 Corinthians. Awesome. Thank you, Elena. Thank you, appreciate it. Thank you, Mark. If you're still looking, say, hold up. It's okay if you look at the table of contents. It's all good. 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And I'm going to read verses 14 through 27. 14 through 27. Here we go. Even so, the body is not made up of one part, but of many. Now, if the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has placed the parts in the body, every one of them just as he wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. And the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, that's my favorite part, by the way. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And the parts that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. And the parts that are unpresentable are treated with special modesty, while our presentable parts need no special treatment. But God has put the body together, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it. It's the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. I've heard the news about CCF, and part of me, there's a feeling of loss. Also, there's a part of me that's excited for new opportunities to grow and thrive and flourish. I think the first sermon that I preached with you all was like over 10 years ago. CCF has been around for a long time, and I absolutely love this church. I recognize some of you I've known you since you were like 14, yeah, now you're, oh my goodness, it's so weird. Yeah, now I have gray hairs, and you're up here singing, you sound beautiful, it's great. You don't like spotlight on you, okay, I'm sorry. Everyone's just looking at her for a minute. But some of you I've known for a while, and I'm so glad that I've got to experience and share in some of your journey. I really, really do love this church, and I'm praying for the next season as the body continues to grow. In the seasons of change, there can be a lot of things lost in the shuffle of that, and I thought that I would look at this passage to kind of look at these 4 anchoring points that we can keep as we move into a new season of change. What are the things that the Bible can tell us about? Here are the things that I want fixed. Even though there's a lot of room to grow, these are the things that I want to remember to keep the fundamentals, to keep these principles and grow in them. If I forget everything else, these 4 things, and I kind of brought out 4 phrases from this passage. Mark mentioned earlier that I've been married about almost 5 years now. And so when I got married, it was a big season of change. I was just used to being single and living by myself. And so I was just kind of used to putting everything everywhere. And then when I got married, my wife, Juliet, some of you know her, she's super organized. And she's completely opposite of me. So I think in the first week, like on the 3rd day, when we moved in and we were married, she gave me like a sheet of paper. And I told y'all some of this story. Some of y'all this story, but she slid a sheet of paper over me. I was like, printed it on the front and back. And I was like, oh, hey, what's this? And she goes, this is January. It's like, girl, what you mean I'm June? What's January? She goes, no, this is your to-do list for January. Like, oh, for real? I'll take a look. And I done messed up right there. She kind of looked at me, take a look. So she really wanted me to like take it seriously. So she knew after a little while, after that first week, that I was not organized, and I was not good with to-do lists. And we had a lot of incompatibilities that way, where I was kind of more impulsive and spontaneous. I wasn't good with calendars and schedules, and she was really all about that. And we probably really wrestled with our incompatibilities for a good 8 or 9 months. And then we finally got counseling. And that 8 or 9 months, we probably said the word divorce like half a dozen times. We were just so fed up with each other already, not even a year into our marriage. And we weren't prepared. We weren't ready. I mean, we took classes, we read all the right books, we thought we talked with all the right people, but actually being in that season was very difficult. And one of the things I learned is that I was so used to being single and having my own way and kind of having my own rhythm that merging my life with another person was a lot more difficult than I thought it would be. And when she did something in a way that I wasn't used to her doing, or I wasn't used to doing in my own way, I would judge her for that. I would judge her for doing things in a certain process that I didn't understand. I would think that I would moralize it, and I would think that she was less than because she did it a certain way. She would do the same thing to me. And in some sense, and all of us, we have a little bit of this in our heart because of what Scripture calls sin. And part of sin says, you orbit around me. You center your life around me. There's a part of me that wanted to carve her into my own image. In other words, there's a title of a book that I really like, and I think it says it all. I was essentially giving her the message, I'd like you if you were more like me. That was it. And we do that to fellow church members, we do that in our relationships, we do that with our parents do that to their kids, we do that with our siblings. And so seasons of change, as we move into new roles and new relational dynamics, it's very difficult to grow in those seasons because things change around us hard to grow. And so in this passage, there are 4 phrases that I'd like to kind of extrapolate here and give to you that I wish I knew going into marriage, and that I kind of use now. My wife and I just changed churches. I kind of have thought of these 4 phrases a lot as the kind of community that I would like to be, and the kind of community that I would like to join. So these 4 phrases are, what is the kind of person that I want to be? What is the kind of community that I want to be? Who is God calling me to be? So if we look at verses 15 through 21, this is Apostle Paul gives a pretty graphic, vivid depiction of what the church should look like. He gives a pretty graphic depiction. It's an illustration of like feet, hands, ears, eyes, noses. He's giving this picture of the church. And if you look at what each part is saying to each other, it's saying, I need you, basically. He says, you can't say, I don't need you. All these different parts need each other. So that first phrase to remember in any season of change, the first relational phrase to remember is, I need your help. I need your help. Whether it's marriage, joining a new church, whether eventually with parenting, or on your campus or with your roommate, I need your help. That is a humbling phrase to be able to say out loud. Where I work at Metropolitan Ministries is a homeless nonprofit. It's a nonprofit that serves the homeless. And there we have a community meeting. So every meeting that we start with this thing called community meeting. No matter what kind of meeting it is, whether it's budgeting, finance, planning for the future, we ask 3 questions. We ask, how are you feeling today? What are your goals today? And the third question we ask is, who can you go to for help? And I love that question, because it says to each other, I can't do this alone, and I don't want to do this alone. We have to be able to do this work together. If you look at the picture that Paul gives, he's kind of making a statement about this is what the Christian body looks like, the church body, versus this is what the mainstream body looks like. So the mainstream, secular, kind of worldly body can look like 2 different things. One is, most places have a very similar, like-minded group of people, and if you kind of go against the stream, and some of you see this on social media, you are kicked out, you are canceled, you're done. You're no longer allowed in that group. In other words, nobody's asking, I need your help. They're all saying, we need to be on the same page, or else you're not one of us. And then there's another kind of group that's more westernized, which is, I am an independent individual. I'm following my own dream, and anybody against me, you're against me and you're my enemy. So there's this either collective kind of group, everybody has to be the same, wear the same uniform, think the same thoughts, have the same beliefs, or you're kicked out. Or this other kind of person that says, I'm an independent individual, I don't need you. But what the church is, it's not completely collective, it's not completely independent. Paul is saying the church is interdependent. Not independent, not dependent, interdependent. We all need each other. We become fuller within the fullness of each other. And the less that we have of each other, the less we become individually. In verse 17 it says, if the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? This makes me think that I am thankful my church is not just a bunch of me, duplicated over and over. I'm glad that the whole church is not an elbow, which would be a monstrosity. I'm glad that we're a diverse body of people that God has orchestrated and put together. Verse 18, He put us together on purpose. If you think about it, the church in a sense, this community, it's like an arranged marriage, this kind of weird, crazy arranged marriage that God put together for a reason. And why did He do that? Why did God arrange us to be this way? Again, going back to marriage, and I just love using marriage as an example, so Apostle Paul does it all the time, where he says the gospel is like marriage. Before I was married, I could make decisions, so if I wanted to go to Denny's or Village Inn, at midnight, I could just go out and go. If I wanted a taco, I didn't have to check with anybody. But now, after I got married, I am beholden to somebody, right? So if I want to get a taco, I first have to be like, hey girl, you want a taco too? And I think when we went out the first month together, we were at this, I think it was a Subway or something, like a sub place. And we sat down with our subs, and I went to the drink machine, and we never buy the fountain soda, the fountain sodas, we just get the cups of water. It's like the Asian way to do it, right? Yeah, just a cup of water. You don't want nothing? No. I'm not paying the extra $2. You don't want chips with that? Nope. So I just had the cup of water. And I sat down with my cup of water, and then my wife, Juliet, looks at me and she goes, "Just the one cup, huh?" "Yes, for you. Here you go." I forgot to take her into account, right? Now, there's a certain kind of, I hate to say it this way, but in a body where there's more than one person, there's a certain loss of freedom. You are beholden to somebody. But in that loss of freedom, there's actually a greater fullness. And here's what I mean. Now when I make a decision, I not only think, oh, I have to take my wife into account, but I also think, what would my wife think about this? Her brain has like melded or augmented into my brain. And I'm able to think more fully with her wisdom with a lot of different options. And in this body of believers, as you make decisions, you might be able to think, what would the pastor think about this? Or what would this person that I really look up to in the church think about this? The more that we have of each other, the more that we have of ourselves. And God puts us together that way that we can become the people that God has called us to be, to fully realize who God is calling us to be. We need each other to become what God dreams us to be. Verse 21, the eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. And the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. In other words, I do need you. I need your help. About a month ago now, some of you know about this already, but I had a really close friend of mine pass away, a really young guy, has a daughter who's a year old, so I've been reading a lot about grief. And I found this thing by C.S. Lewis, my favorite writer, and in Four Loves, he writes this. He talks about two friends that he had, Charles and his other friend, Ronald, who's J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings. So he had these two friends, and Charles, one of his friends, suddenly died. And C.S. Lewis very selfishly thought, now that Charles is gone, I'll have more of my friend Ronald, J.R.R. Tolkien. But it turns out that he actually ended up not having more of Ronald, but less. And this is what he writes. He says, in each of my friends, there is something that only some other friend can fully bring out. I'll say that again. In each of my friends, there is something that only some other friend can fully bring out. By myself, he writes, I am not large enough to call the whole person into activity. I want other lights than my own to show all his facets. Now that Charles is gone, I shall never again see Ronald's reaction to a specifically Charles-like joke. Far from having more of Ronald, having him to myself. Now that Charles is gone, I have less of Ronald. In this, friendship exhibits a glorious nearness by resemblance to heaven itself, where the very multitude of the blessed increases the fruition which each has of God. For every soul, seeing God in his or her own way, doubtless communicates that unique vision to all the rest. That's why the seraphim in Isaiah's vision are crying, holy, 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 not to God, but to one another, Isaiah 6:3. The more we thus share the heavenly bread between us, the more we shall all have. We need each other. We need each other. Here's the second and third phrase. I'm going to put these together. When you look at verse 21 again, it says that I can't say to the hand, I don't need you. The head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. In other words, sometimes the hand has to be able to tell the eye. The hand has to be able to tell the eye, you probably think you can lift that, but it's too heavy. Or the hand has to tell the eye, I know that looks hard, but you need to serve them. Sometimes the feet have to be able to tell the head, that's too far, you need to rest. Or the feet need to tell the head, maybe that's not logical, but we need to travel there to serve them. In other words, there's an accountability for each part of the body. There is a sort of keeping each other accountable, holding each other to a certain standard in the body. And we need that so much that we can get to the point where each of us on our own can say, I was wrong and I'm sorry. Those phrases, I was wrong and I'm sorry. In any season that you're in, when you enter a new relational role, you need to be able to say, I was wrong and I'm sorry. The places that I work at, I work both at the hospital and the nonprofit, they hold themselves so accountable. I've never been in a workplace like this. Most workplaces can be very toxic, and they blame shift, and they blame each other for things, or they take credit for things that they didn't even do. But in the two places I'm at, I mean, they're awesome. They hold themselves so accountable that there's this thing I hear at least 3-4 times a day where they'll say something and then feel like they hurt somebody, and and then they'll go up to the person and say, you know what, that thing I just said, that was really weird. Can we talk about that? That was weird. Can we talk about that? I hear that like 5-6 times a day, where someone is so accountable to their own actions. They'll just grab somebody and say, you know that thing that I said, or that thing that I did yesterday or last week, that was super weird. Can we talk about that? That is the start of their apology. That is the start of them saying, I was wrong, and I'm sorry. And I'm not saying that we call each other out for every little infraction, that we become like these spiritual parole officers, not that we're looking for those things. But I would hope, with the way that the church is in the news and in headlines, I wish that we could hold ourselves so accountable that the people outside the church would look at the church and say, yeah, the church messed up, but they hold themselves so accountable that we don't need to worry about them. They hold themselves so accountable that we don't need to even get involved, because they will deal out justice inside the walls of that church. To be able to say, I was wrong, and I'm sorry. That was a pretty hard thing to say in marriage. That's a pretty hard thing to say with roommates. It's a hard thing to say to parents. It's hard for parents to say to kids. But that is the position that Apostle Paul outlines that God wants for us. And it can just start with that very simple, that was weird. Can we talk about that? But of course, that can get abusive. So here's this last thing. It needs to be all underlined by this. I need your help. I was wrong. I'm sorry about that. Here's this last thing. As we transition into seasons, as we move into new roles, here's the underlining anchor that we want to hold on to. When you look at verses 22 to 24, I'm going to read these again. And Apostle Paul, he says this: on the contrary, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. The parts that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. The parts that are unpresentable, we treat with special modesty. Presentable parts need no special treatment. So what is Paul saying? He's saying at least two different things, and I think they both overlap. Paul is saying that we receive people who are quote-unquote weaker. Those who don't seem as gifted or talented or put together or have the same kind of mental health that we do. People who are quote-unquote weaker. He's also saying this. Paul's saying that we're especially compassionate to the unpresentable. Those who enter the church with a shameful history, a criminal record, guilty conscience, a past that they're not proud of. Especially those who can't care for themselves, the disabled and disadvantaged. What is Paul saying? Paul's saying that we want to be a community that in everything that we do, we're giving the message, I love you. No matter what, I love you. I'm with you and for you, I love you. That message of love and embrace. The weaker people, those people who are kicked out or those people who are made fun of or mocked, we take those people. Reading about the early church, I didn't know this, but reading it as early as the 1st century through the 4th, the first orphanages started by the church. You know, people were dropping off babies that they didn't want. They just dropped them off at the church thinking that they would take care of them. And the monks there, the nuns there, they took care of them. Orphanages started there. First hospitals started by churches. First universities started by churches. They were trying to educate people who weren't educated. The early church was just radically generous. Their constant message was, I love you. The heart of the church is marked by open doors and open arms. When I first came to the church, some of you know, I've told this story before, that I grew up an atheist, probably until my 20s. And so I was not a Christian until pretty late in life. I've been an atheist longer, actually, than I've been a Christian. And when I went and attended, it was not a logical argument or persuasive tactic that got me to begin to explore the gospel. Instead, it was when I walked into church, I looked at people and I said, the way that these people love each other, it's impossible. There's no way. It's not natural. This is not what people do in the world. There's something supernatural about it. And I went backwards, looking at the people first, then to the Bible, looking at that impossible love. The people were just supernaturally loving and gracious towards one another. And not just to the people who come inside, but to one another. Reconciliation inside. Reconciliation inside. When I started going to church more, I joined the praise team. And when I joined the praise team, I found out that someone else on the praise team didn't like me. And if you're like me and you're a little bit of a people pleaser, when I find out that someone doesn't like me, it really bothers me. So someone was like, hey, she doesn't like you. Like, what? Why? I am awesome. I was just so upset. So at praise practice, I would go to practice, and I would see the guys, and I'd see her, and I'd be like, hey, what's up, what's up? And when I'd see her, I'd go, hey! I was trying to act extra friendly. And anytime I said something funny or told a joke, I made sure that she was there, and I'd say it extra loud, right? Just like, I think she liked me. I want to prove that I'm awesome. But this carried on so long, this went on for months, that eventually I started to kind of dislike her back. You know what I mean? So then when I see her, I see the praise team, I'd be like, hey, I see her, I'd be like, what's up? Just keep walking. But this went on for about, I would say, over a year. Or for whatever reason, we just didn't like each other. And then finally, I came to practice early, and she happened to be there. It was just she and I, right? We were there, and then she looked at me and she kind of pointed at me and said, hey, you. She said, I need to talk to you. And in my mind I was like, So we went into this room, and it was super strange. There was this long table, and she was on one end of the long table. I was on the other. There are no chairs. So we're just standing there. And she puts both hands on the table, and she leans over and she goes, listen, I don't like you. She finally said it to my face. So I wanted to say, I don't like you either, But instead it came out of my mouth, And then she said, but 1 Corinthians 13 says, love keeps no record of wrongs. I would like to start over. In my mind, it's like, quote, Bible verses. That's love, And then she reached across the table and she stuck out her hand. Now I had some options, right? I could have said, get your pen on my face, Just walked out of that weird, awkward situation. Or I could have said, okay, let's start over. And what I thought about in that moment was our Father in heaven, our God. I just thought about God in heaven looking down at this situation. Looking down at all these situations. Hatred, animosity, division, our politics, our homes, just all these different things. Just how grieved God must be. And God wanting us to love. He made us to love one another. To love Him, to love each other. I just thought about that, my heart grieved too, and I felt His grief. And so very awkwardly, I went to the side of the table, put out my hand and said, sure, I would love to start over. And we shook hands. And we're still friends to this day. On Instagram, mostly. We're still friends to this day. The church ought to be, our community ought to be the most loving place on the face of the earth. The most loving place on the face of the earth. As you transition into new seasons, can we keep that in mind? This clear vision that God has given us. That I want to be a community that is so loving that it looks impossible, except for the grace of God. That I want to be in a place where they cultivate that and promote that and foster that we are the most loving place on the face of the earth. How do we get the strength to do that? When you look at verse 26, how do we get a changed heart like this that says, I was wrong, I'm sorry, I need your help, and I love you? If one part suffers, verse 26, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. And some of you already know what this verse means, that love, it suffers. It has a cost. To lean in, to love one another, there's a cost in it. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. For some of you who have a sibling who's kind of gone prodigal, or you have a friend who's just kind of living their own life, you're reaching out to them, and you just want to love on them, and you've seen that your parents and other people have just poured into them, but they're just doing what they want. You're always worried, and you're always concerned, you're always praying about them, and bringing them up in prayer requests. There's a cost. There's a suffering, a long-suffering kind of love. Now, the amazing thing is that God, He suffered all the way. He paid that cost to love us through His cross, through the cost of His Son. He loved us all the way. And when we can see that God has paid with His Son, that we too can pay pay that cost, to love our brothers and sisters, to have the humility to say I was wrong and I'm sorry, to know that God put us together on purpose, to be able to have the humility to say, I need your help. And we can see the vision of the cross and what God did for us. And of course, we can pay that cost. We can pay that cost. A church of changed hearts can only come from knowing the unchanging heart of God's love for you. I'll say that again. A church of changed hearts can only come from knowing the unchanging heart of God's love for you. See, the gospel is at least this. The gospel is at least that Jesus was never wrong, but he took on the cross as if he did, as if he was. It's as if he said, I was wrong. Jesus had no reason to say he was sorry, but he forgave us even though we never were. He acted as if he was sorry. And Jesus, he loved us despite fully seeing our ugliness. And though God really in himself doesn't need us, he acts as if he does. And in that, we can look to one another and pay that same cost of love. I know, church, as you transition into this new season, as some of you are thinking about marriage and parenting, some of you might have a weird roommate. It's hard to love on that person, and if you don't have a weird roommate, then you're probably the weird one. I know being with people is tough, and the church would be great if it wasn't for other people. And even if there was a perfect church, the moment that you walk in, it's not perfect anymore. It's hard. All of this is difficult. And as you're transitioning into this new community and all that stuff, there might be messiness, and there's just a lot of things to think about, conflict and their style and this style and my style. And I just pray that you keep the gospel, the love of the gospel, full center, and you have that clear vision of what God has done for you. And then at every season, you remember what you were made for, to love, to pour out, to continually love. Keep that vision at the cross, the cost that God paid, that Jesus paid, at the front and center of all your seasons of change. And that's how we grow, that's how we thrive. Now, let's pray together.